here's what you don't know. Sony and Nintendo once worked together on a CD-ROM drive for the Super Nintendo.
It's okay! I'm a limo driver!
And it went about as well as you would have expected. Their failed partnership came all the way back in the early 90s.
It's the 90s! It's hammer time! Come on!
The 90s were a simpler time. Biggie and Tupac were still alive, and our president still told us the truth.
I did not have sex.
It was a time long before you had to put on Doc Brown goggles to find Pokemon in your driveway to have a good time.
Where we're going, we don't need roads.
And here's what you don't know. As we all know, modern video games really gained public attention in 1971 with the release of Pong, a revolutionary game where a dot travels back and forth across a screen. It wasn't long after Pong turned us all into kittens playing with laser pointers that companies began churning out exciting new games. 30 years later, Donkey Kong is still the best Carpenter seeks revenge on Monkey game. Let's also not forget Pac-Man and the classic sequel that answered the question on everyone's minds. What if Pac-Man wore a bow?
Oh, sexy girlfriend!
Before we knew what hit us, video games were invading our homes, and companies like Nintendo were leading the pack. The video game market was exploding in the late 80s, so who wouldn't want a piece of that? Sony, that's who.
What you want me to do with this? Eat it? I threw it on the ground.
Ken Kutaragi, an employee of Sony at the time, may have been the only Sony member who saw the potential in video games. When Nintendo reached out for help on their sound chip, Kutaragi was like,
Hey!
It was the 80s, so we assume he was really into Happy Days.
You ain't nothing but a hound dog.
By the time Sony realized what he was doing, boy, were they mad! But even they couldn't deny how smart the move was. So when Nintendo approached Sony about a joint venture, Sony figured there was no possible way it could fail. And they were right, in a way. Sony and Nintendo began working together to bring CD-ROM technology to the Super Nintendo, hoping to create both an add-on for existing systems and a new console they called PlayStation. 2 words. 2 words? PlayStation. Sounds like a neighborhood park your parents warned you not to go to. Billy, you stay away from that PlayStation.
Good, now we're having fun.
Everything was going great until Nintendo president Hiroshi Yamauchi actually read the contract and realized Nintendo was not getting a boss deal.
What is this?
Nintendo runs this town, and don't you forget it!
While the two companies bickered like a married couple, Nintendo stepped out on Sony and slid into the DMs of their sworn enemy, Philips. Sony tried to fix the deal as best they could, but dude, sometimes a massive video game company just isn't that into you.
What have you done? What have you done?
In a move forced out of desperation, Sony decided they didn't need no man and made the console themselves. And they had the good sense to push the 2 words together, creating the very first PlayStation. Clearly, the deal with Philips was the smart move for Nintendo, considering how influential Philips has been to the video game market since.
The escape from Cyber City CDI, the Philips Imagination Machine.
Sony PlayStation revolutionized the gaming industry, and Sony has been a player ever since.
I'm not a player, I just crush a lot.
Nintendo doubled down on cartridges with the release of Nintendo 64, which admittedly produced some of the greatest video games ever. We're looking at you, GoldenEye.
You have 158 bullets for the fucking Magnum? I needed bullets!
Nintendo did lose a lot of traction in the console game, which they've only been able to start gaining back in the last decade or so since they introduced the Wii.
Is the Wiimote broken?
So Nintendo ditched Sony, and Sony ditched Nintendo, and somewhere among all the chaos, a console was created.
Hey, plumber
boy, Mustache Man, your worst nightmare has arrived.
The recently resurfaced Nintendo PlayStation console has video game enthusiasts wondering what could have been. It doesn't work yet, but we've got our loneliest, best people working on it. This has been an incredibly exciting, watch it again right now episode of What You Don't Know.